28 years. That is how long I sat behind a desk at Henderson, Callaway, and Marsh, attorneys at law. 28 years of formatting motions, indexing exhibits, tracking filing deadlines down to the hour, and making sure that the attorneys I supported did not accidentally torpedo their own cases by forgetting a local rule or missing a margin requirement that a judge enforced like Holy Scripture. My name is Diane. Around the office, most people called me D. But for the better part of 3 decades, the name that mattered was always on the letterhead, never on my nameplate. That is how it works in the legal world. The secretary is the invisible engine. We are the ones who make sure the trains run on time, while the engineers collect the praise. Let me tell you something about my record, because it matters deeply for what comes next. In 28 years of preparing court filings at Henderson, Callaway, and Marsh, I never had a single document rejected by a court clerk. Not once. Not a motion, not a brief, not a subpoena, not a discovery response, not even a routine notice of appearance. Every single piece of paper that left my desk was formatted correctly, signed properly, filed on time, and served in accordance with every applicable rule. Whether that was the federal rules of civil procedure, the state court rules, or the particular standing orders of whichever judge we happened to be appearing before that week. That is not luck. That is 28 years of meticulous, obsessive, unrelenting attention to detail. That is craft. And craft, as I would soon discover, is something that certain people cannot recognize, because they have never had to develop any of their own. Our firm sat 4 blocks from the county courthouse in a mid-sized city that I will not name, for reasons that will become painfully obvious. We were a civil litigation shop, roughly 30 attorneys, handling everything from breach of contract disputes to personal injury to the occasional mass tort. Nothing glamorous. Nothing that made the national news. But the work was real, the stakes were enormous for the clients who trusted us, and the margins for error were razor thin. One missed deadline, one improperly formatted exhibit, one forgotten certificate of service, and you could lose a case worth millions of dollars. I had seen it happen to other firms. I had watched careers end over a transposed case number. I never once let it happen at mine. The office smelled the way law offices always smell: toner, ink, old carpet that should have been replaced a decade ago, and coffee that had been sitting on a burner plate since 6 in the morning. The fluorescent lights above my desk hummed at a low, constant frequency that most people stopped noticing after a few months. I still heard it even after all those years. I heard it especially at night, when the attorneys had gone home, and I was still sitting at my desk, checking a filing for the 3rd time, because Judge Callahan's standing orders required Century, School Book 14, point in the body text and 12, point in the footnotes, and I would be absolutely damned if I sent something over to Chambers with even a single character in the wrong typeface. I knew every clerk at the courthouse by first name. I knew which ones were strict about staple placement, and which ones would let you slide on a missing exhibit index if you promised to messenger a corrected copy. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, I knew that Judge Hernandez preferred his courtesy copies spiral bound. I knew that Judge Park required blue backing paper on all motions filed in her courtroom, and I knew that Judge Callahan, the Honorable Meredith R. Callahan, ran her courtroom with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker, and would strike a filing over a half-inch margin violation without even blinking. These are things you learn over decades. They are not written in any textbook. They are not taught in any law school. They live in the institutional memory of the people who do the work, day after day, year after year, and they are worth more than any degree hanging on any wall in any office in America. That was my world. Predictable. Exacting. And it worked beautifully, until Blake Whitfield III walked through the front door of Henderson, Callaway, and Marsh on a Monday morning in early October, trailing the scent of expensive cologne, and the unmistakable aura of a man who believed he was the smartest person in every room he had ever entered. Blake was 31 years old. Harvard Law class of 2016, Wharton MBA on top of it. He had spent 3 years at a boutique legal technology firm in San Francisco where, as he liked to remind absolutely everyone, within the first 5 minutes of any conversation, he had quote optimized legal operations using data-driven workflow analytics unquote. I still do not know exactly what that phrase means, and I suspect, in my bones, that neither did he. What I do know is that Marcus Henderson, our founding senior partner, had recruited Blake as a junior partner with a very specific mandate: modernize the firm, cut overhead costs, increase operational efficiency, bring Henderson, Callaway, and Marsh kicking and screaming into the 21st century. Marcus was 63 years old and thinking seriously about retirement. He wanted the firm to look attractive for a potential merger or acquisition, and Blake's RA Summa glittered with the kind of buzzwords that make aging managing partners feel like they are being forward-thinking. So Blake arrived with a company-issued laptop, a wireless presentation clicker that he wielded like a magic wand, and a title that gave him direct authority over all quote administrative operations unquote. That meant me. That meant every paralegal, every file clerk, every receptionist, and every legal secretary in the entire building. He held his first all-staff meeting on his second day. I remember it with crystalline clarity, because of what he said. He stood at the front of the main conference room in a slim-fit, navy suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, clicked to his opening slide, a pie chart with 4 colors, and said these exact words. Quote, "The modern law firm cannot afford to carry redundant processes. We need to treat our administrative resources the way any competitive enterprise treats its operational infrastructure. Lean, agile, scalable." Unquote. Administrative resources, that is what he called us, not staff, not team members, not colleagues who had dedicated years and in some cases decades of their lives to this firm. Resources, like printer paper, like toner cartridges, like the coffee filters in the breakroom kitchen, that nobody ever remembered to reorder except me. I looked around the conference room and saw the same expression on every face around that long mahogany table. The tight-lipped, careful blankness of people who understand they are being insulted but cannot afford to say so out loud, because the person doing the insulting has the authority to fire them. Within his first 2 weeks, Blake began systematically dismantling systems that had been in place for over a decade. The very first thing he eliminated was my filing checklist. I had created that checklist 17 years earlier, after a near-miss where a second-year associate almost filed a motion for summary judgment in the wrong division of the court. It was a simple 2-page document, a step-by-step verification list tailored to each judge's standing orders, the court's local rules, and the firm's own internal quality control protocols. Every legal secretary in the firm used it. It caught errors. It prevented disasters. It added maybe 15 extra minutes to the filing preparation process, and in 17 years of continuous use, it had never once failed to do its job. Blake called it busywork. He said it was, and I quote, a bottleneck in the document pipeline. He replaced it with a cloud-based project management platform that tracked tasks with color-coded status bars, automated email notifications, and real-time dashboards, but had absolutely no capacity to account for the specific, idiosyncratic, and absolutely mandatory requirements of individual judges. When I pointed this out in a carefully worded email that I CC'd to the office manager for the record, Blake replied with a message I still have saved to this day. Quote, "Diane, I appreciate your institutional perspective, but the goal here is standardization. We cannot build scalable systems around the preferences of individual judicial officers." Unquote. I read that email 3 times. The third time, something cold and quiet settled into my chest. I printed it. I placed it in a manila folder, and I set that folder in the bottom drawer of my desk. I had a feeling, the kind of feeling you develop after nearly 3 decades of watching people make mistakes, that I was going to need it later. The small fires began almost immediately. Within the first month under Blake's new system, 2 filings went out with incorrect caption formatting, case numbers transposed. I caught both them before they left the building, but only because I was still running my old checklist. Quietly at my own desk, on my own time after hours, I corrected the errors, prepared the documents, and said nothing. I did not want a confrontation. I just wanted the work to be done correctly. But Blake noticed that my filing preparation times were exceeding his projected benchmarks. He sent me another email, this one seeking both the office manager and human resources, asking me to, quote, adhere to the standardized preparation schedule, unquote, and reminding me that, quote, efficiency metrics are a key component of the firm's upcoming operational review, unquote. I felt heat rise in my face when I read it, not embarrassment. Anger. The specific, quiet, slow, burning anger that settles into your bones when someone who has been in the building for 30 days presumes to lecture you about a job you have been doing flawlessly since before they learned how to drive a car. I replied with a single sentence, understood, I will follow the established procedures. And I did. For a while, God help me, I still tried to protect him from himself. The second month brought more problems. A discovery response went out to opposing counsel, with an exhibit missing 2 critical pages. A subpoena was served 1 full day late, because Blake's software calculated the service deadline using calendar days, instead of business days, which is a mistake so elementary that any first-year paralegal would catch it before lunch on their first day. A set of courtesy copies for Judge Park arrived without the blue backing paper she requires for all motions in her courtroom, and her clerk telephoned our office to express the judge's displeasure, in language that was technically professional, but left absolutely no ambiguity about how close we were to a formal reprimand. Each time, I was the one who made the fix. Each time, I was the one who picked up the telephone, apologized to the clerk, and personally drove to the courthouse to deliver corrected documents. And each time, Blake Whitfield took no notice whatsoever, because on his dashboards and spreadsheets, the task status showed completed and the progress bars glowed green. I went to Marcus Henderson once. Just once. On a Thursday afternoon, I caught him between meetings in the hallway outside his corner office. I did not sit down. I never sat down in a senior partner's office, unless expressly invited. I stood in his doorway and told him, plainly and without any exaggeration, that Blake's new systems were creating real, quantifiable risks. That the filing checklist existed for a reason. That local rules and standing orders are not suggestions, they are mandates. And that a project management platform, designed for technology startups, was not an adequate substitute for institutional knowledge. Marcus listened. He nodded slowly, the way people nod when they want to appear thoughtful but have already decided not to act. He said, Diane, I hear you, and I appreciate your concern. But Blake comes with outstanding credentials, and we need to give his approach a fair chance to prove itself. I trust you to keep things running smoothly in the meantime. Keep things running smoothly. 28 years of loyalty, a spotless record, and a detailed, specific warning about impending problems, and his response was, keep things running smoothly while the new man tears apart everything that made it smooth in the first place. I walked back to my desk. I sat down. I looked at the filing folders on my credenza, the ones with the color-coded tabs I had organized by judge, by courtroom, by case type. I looked at the framed photograph on my desk, my daughter at her college graduation, a degree she earned because I paid for it with the salary I made sitting at this desk for decades. And something shifted inside me. Not dramatically. There was no thunderclap, no moment of cinematic revelation. It was quiet. Like a gear clicking into a new position inside a machine. I decided, sitting there in that humming fluorescent light, that I was finished saving Blake Whitfield. The third from himself. If he wanted his systems followed to the letter, I would follow them. Exactly. Precisely. Without deviation. and whatever happened as a consequence would be his responsibility to own. The case that set the stage for everything was Delacroix versus Harmon Industrial. It was a toxic tort action, a family whose property and groundwater had been contaminated by chemical runoff from a manufacturing plant. The claimed damages totaled $14.7 million. It was the single biggest case Henderson, Callaway, and Marsh had handled in at least 5 years, and the lead attorney was Robert Callaway Jr., the son of one of the firm's original founders, and a meticulous, deeply experienced trial lawyer. Robert was the kind of attorney I cherished working with, thorough, precise, and pathologically careful about procedural compliance. He said please, said thank you. He asked my opinion on filing logistics. He understood that my role was not to mindlessly type what he dictated, but to ensure that what he produced met every single technical requirement the court demanded, down to the last punctuation mark. The critical filing in the Delacroix case was a motion for summary judgment. If the court granted it, the case would end in our client's favor without a trial. If the court denied it, we were staring at another 18 months of brutal litigation and a trial that would cost the client hundreds of thousands of dollars in additional legal fees. Robert had been drafting the brief for 6 weeks. The final product was 53 pages long, supported by 9 exhibits, containing 47 case citations, and presenting a legal argument that even I, someone who is not a lawyer and whose opinion on substantive legal matters counts for precisely nothing, thought was genuinely brilliant work. The motion had to be filed with the court no later than 5:00 p.m. on November 14th, and the judge assigned to the Delacroix case was the Honorable Meredith R. Callahan. Judge Callahan was 67 years old and had been on the bench for over 2 decades. She was universally respected, quietly feared, and absolutely uncompromising about procedural compliance in her courtroom. Her standing orders, which I kept in a dedicated 3-ring binder at my desk, were 12 pages long and specified, among many other things, the following requirements for all dispositive motions. Margins of exactly 1 inch on all 4 sides. Body text in Century Schoolbook 14 point. Footnotes in Century Schoolbook 12 point. Line spacing of exactly 1.5. All exhibits must be separated by labeled tabs, in the color corresponding to the filing party. Blue for plaintiff, red for defendant. The certificate of service must bear an original wet ink signature. No electronic or digital signatures accepted under any circumstances. 3 hard courtesy copies must be hand-delivered to chambers no later than 2:00 p.m. on the date of filing, and those copies must be bound with a specific type of fastener, not stapled, not spiral bound, but secured with 2-prong metal clasps at the top of each document. I had filed in Judge Callahan's courtroom at least 30 times over the years. I knew her clerk, a woman named Rosalind, who had been with the judge almost as long as I had been with my firm. Rosalind and I had built an understanding over those years, the kind of professional trust that exists between 2 people who take their work seriously. If I prepared a filing, Rosalind knew it would be right. If there was ever a question, she would call me directly, and I would resolve it before the judge ever needed to be involved. That relationship was not something you could replicate with software. 2 weeks before the filing deadline, Blake Whitfield inserted himself into the Delacroix case. He did not do this because he possessed any expertise in toxic tort law. He did it because Delacroix was the firm's most visible, highest stakes matter, and he wanted to showcase his operational improvements on a case the senior partners were monitoring closely. He sent an email to Robert Callaway, with copies to Marcus Henderson and the office manager, volunteering to, quote, oversee the administrative and filing logistics for the Delacroix summary judgment motion as a pilot test of the firm's new streamlined filing protocol, unquote. Robert called me into his office that same afternoon. He closed the door behind me, which he almost never did, and said, I got Blake's email about the Delacroix filing. What is your honest assessment? I gave him the truth without any softening. I told him that Blake's system did not account for Judge Callahan's standing orders. That electronic filing alone would not satisfy the courtesy copy requirement. That Blake's formatting templates defaulted to Times New Roman with standard margins, neither of which complied with the judge's specifications. That if we followed Blake's protocol, the motion would be stricken, and we would very likely lose the case. Robert rubbed his temples with his fingertips. He looked exhausted. He said he would talk to Marcus. He talked to Marcus. And Marcus, who was in the middle of coordinating his annual golf retreat to Hilton Head, told Robert to work with Blake and give the new system a real test. He said it would be good for firm culture if the senior attorneys demonstrated willingness to embrace change. Robert came back to my desk the next morning with genuine apology written across his face. He said, Blake is going to manage the filing logistics on this one. I need you to cooperate with him. I am sorry. I told him I understood. Then I walked back to my desk and I began to prepare. Over the next 10 days, I sent Blake 4 separate emails. Each one was polite, professional, thoroughly detailed, and impossible to misinterpret. The first email outlined Judge Callahan's complete standing orders and attached the 12-page document. The second specified each formatting requirement that differed from the firm's new default template, presented in a side-by-side comparison table. The third addressed the courtesy copy requirements, including the 2 o'clock hand, delivery deadline, the metal, clasp, binding method, and the red exhibit tabs for defendant filings. The fourth flagged the wet ink signature requirement for the certificate of service. Blake responded to the first email with 2 words. Thanks, Diane. He did not respond to the second at all. He responded to the third with, we are transitioning to full electronic filing. Courtesy copies are an outdated practice, and I have confirmed with the court's website that e-filing is accepted for all civil motions. And he responded to the fourth with, the firm's e-filing platform includes a compliant digital signature function. Please use it. He had confirmed with the court's website. The court's general website, the public-facing page that listed default filing procedures applicable to all judges. Not Judge Callahan's standing orders, which superseded those defaults and were available only by direct request from her clerk's office or on a separate page buried 3 links deep in the court's internal portal that you would only know about if you had been filing in that courthouse for a year. Blake had not found that page. Blake did not even know it existed. And Blake did not ask me, because asking me would have required admitting that a legal secretary knew something that a Harvard-educated, Wharton-trained junior partner did not, and that admission was something Blake Whitfield, the third, was constitutionally incapable of making. I printed all 4 of my emails and all 4 of his responses. I placed them in the folder. The folder was getting thick. And then I made my decision. I would comply. Fully. Completely. Without deviation. I would execute Blake's instructions exactly as he gave them, precisely as he specified, and not one single thing more. No quiet corrections at my desk at 9 o'clock at night. No private phone calls to Rosalind to smooth things over. No last-minute heroics. If this man wanted to drive the car off the cliff, I would sit in the passenger seat, buckle my seatbelt, fold my hands in my lap, and watch the guardrail disappear. But I am not reckless, and I am not cruel. The Delacroix family, whose drinking water had been poisoned, and whose children had developed chronic respiratory problems, deserved better than to have their case destroyed by a management consultant's ego. So on my own time, during my lunch breaks, during my evenings at home at my kitchen table, and across one entire Saturday afternoon with a pot of tea, and a printer I bought from an office supply store with my own money, I prepared a second filing, a shadow filing. Everything that Blake would not allow me to do through official channels, I did independently. I formatted the brief in Century School Book 14-point with 1-inch margins and 1.5-line spacing. I created red exhibit tabs with proper labels. I printed 3 pristine copies and bound each one with 2 pronged metal clasps. I prepared a certificate of service with a blank signature line for Robert Calloway's original wet ink signature. I placed all 3 copies in a banker's box, sealed it, and stored it under my desk behind my purse where no one would notice it. And I waited. November 14th came on a Wednesday. The morning was cold. There was a thin layer of frost on my windshield when I walked to my car at 6:45, and my heater did not produce warm air until I was halfway to the office. I remember these sensory details with the precision of a court transcript, because everything about they burned itself into my memory permanently. Blake arrived at the office at 8:30, early for him. He was wearing a charcoal suit and radiating confidence that bordered on performance art. He paused at my desk on his way to his office, set one hand on the edge of my cubicle wall, and said, "Big day, Diane. Let us execute cleanly." Execute cleanly, as though we were launching a product, instead of filing a critical motion in a $14.7 million case that would determine whether a poisoned family received justice. At 9:15, Blake emailed me the final version of the motion. Robert had approved the legal content, the substance, the argument, but Blake had reformatted the entire document using his standard template, Times New Roman, 12-point default margins. No exhibit tabs. The certificate of service bore a digital signature. I opened the file on my screen and felt my stomach clench like a fist. It was wrong. Everything about it was wrong. The wrong font, the wrong spacing, the wrong margins. No exhibit separators, no wet signature, and there would be no courtesy copies delivered to Judge Callahan's chambers because Blake had not authorized any. I took a long, slow breath. I looked at my screen. I looked at the banker's box under my desk, and I clicked File. The electronic filing went through at 9:42 a.m. The system generated a confirmation receipt, which I printed and placed in my folder. Blake saw the green status bar update on his dashboard, and, within 20 minutes, sent a firm-wide email congratulating the team on the "successful deployment of our streamlined filing protocol on the Delacroix matter." He used the word seamless. I ate lunch at my desk that day. A turkey sandwich from the deli on 3rd Street. The bread was slightly stale. I barely tasted it. I was watching the clock on my monitor, the one in the bottom right corner, counting minutes. I knew what was coming. I knew with the bone-deep certainty of 28 years that before the end of this day, my telephone was going to ring with a call that would change everything. The phone rang at 1:37 p.m. I picked it up and heard a voice I recognized as well as my own sister's. "It is Rosalind. We have a problem." I said nothing for a beat. Then I said, "Tell me." Rosalind's voice was tight. Controlled, but tight, the way a person sounds when they are trying to remain professional while delivering very bad news. She said, "The judge reviewed the electronic filing on the Delacroix motion this morning during a break in her hearing schedule. The formatting does not comply with her standing orders. The font is wrong. The margins are wrong. There are no exhibit tabs. There are no courtesy copies in chambers. And the certificate of service bears a digital signature, which her standing orders explicitly prohibit. Judge Callahan is extremely displeased. She has indicated that she is prepared to strike the motion and issue a show-cause order for sanctions against the firm. I am calling you as a professional courtesy, because we go back a very long way, but I need to tell you honestly. This is very, very bad." I closed my eyes. I listened to the fluorescent lights humming above me. I felt my heartbeat in my fingertips, slow and steady. And I said, very calmly, "Rosalind, I understand completely. Can you tell me exactly how much time we have before the judge signs the order?" Rosalind paused. "She is in a hearing until 3 o'clock. Fully compliant copies are delivered to her chambers. Before she returns to her bench, I can attempt to bring them to her attention before she signs the strike order. But I need to be clear, that is not a guarantee. You know how she is." I did know. I thanked Rosalind. I hung up the phone. and then I sat at my desk for exactly 15 seconds, letting the silence settle around me like a physical weight, before I pushed my chair back, stood up, and walked down the hall to Blake Whitfield's office. He was at his desk, scrolling through something on his laptop with one hand, a ceramic coffee mug in the other. He looked up when I appeared in his doorway, and he smiled. He actually smiled. "Hey Diane, excellent work this morning. Everything went completely smooth." "We have a problem," I said. I did not sit down. I did not soften my tone. I told him in precise, clinical terms, exactly what Rosalind had communicated to me. I watched the color drain from his face the way ink drains from a cracked cartridge. Slowly at first, then all at once, until his complexion matched the gray November sky outside his window. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Then he managed to say, "That cannot be right." I checked the court's website. I verified the procedures. "You checked the general filing page," I said. "Not the judge's standing orders, which supersede the general procedures. I sent you the complete standing orders in an email on October 29th. I followed up with 3 additional emails outlining every specific requirement that your template failed to meet. You directed me, in writing, to use the standard template and electronic filing only. I complied with your instructions." Blake's jaw tightened. His eyes narrowed. He set his coffee mug down hard enough that I heard it crack against the desk surface. "Well," he said, "you should have escalated more aggressively. You should have insisted. You should have." "I escalated 4 times in writing," I said. "I have the emails. I have your responses. Every communication is documented and preserved. I also raised the issue verbally with Mr. Henderson, who deferred to your judgment." The silence that followed was the loudest sound I have ever experienced in that office. It filled the room like pressure in a sealed chamber. Blake stared at me across his desk. I stared back. Neither of us blinked. Then the door behind me opened, and Robert Calloway walked in. He had heard. Our receptionist told him. She and I had been friends for 19 years, and she knew exactly what was unfolding. Robert looked at Blake. Then at me. His expression was tight, controlled, barely containing what was underneath. "Someone tell me what is happening right now," he said. Blake started talking. He talked about systems and protocols and website confirmations, and standardized procedures and operational best practices. Robert listened for approximately 45 seconds, and then he raised one hand, palm out, and the room went silent. He turned to me and said 3 words that I will remember for the rest of my professional life. Can this be fixed?" I looked at him. I thought about the Delacroix family. I thought about $14.7 million. I thought about a mother whose children could not drink the water from their own kitchen tap. And I said, "Yes. But I need your signature. Right now." I walked to my desk. I bent down and pulled the banker's box out from beneath it. I carried it back to Robert's office and set it on his conference table. I opened the lid, and I lifted out 3 flawlessly prepared copies of the motion for summary judgment. Century Schoolbook 14.1-inch margins, 1.5 line spacing, red exhibit tabs with laser printed labels. 2-pronged metal clasp binding. Every page perfect. Robert looked at the copies, looked at me. His eyes went wide. "You prepared these?" he asked. "On my own time," I said. I had a feeling they would be needed. I placed the certificate of service on his desk. He took a pen from his breast pocket, the heavy silver one his father had given him, and he signed it. Wet ink, black. Exactly as Judge Callahan required. I took the signed originals, placed one in each of the 3 copies, and returned them to the box. Then I picked up my car keys, took the box under my arm, and walked out of the office without saying another word to anyone. I drove to the courthouse in 11 minutes. I parked in the 2-hour zone on Maple Street, the same spot I had been using for 20 years. I carried the box through the security checkpoint, rode the elevator to the 4th floor, and walked through the double doors into the clerk's office. Rosalind was standing at the counter. When she saw me come through those doors with a banker's box under my arm, Her shoulders dropped about 2 inches, the unmistakable physical release of a person shedding an enormous weight of anxiety. "D," she said. "Please tell me those are what I think they are." I set the box on the counter. She opened it. She pulled out the first copy and examined it methodically, page by page, checking the font, running her finger along the margins, inspecting the exhibit tabs, verifying the binding. She looked up at me with an expression I can only describe as profound relief mixed with something close to admiration. "This is perfect," she said. "This is exactly right." I looked at her and said, "It always is." She took the copies. She checked the clock on the wall behind her. 2:21 p.m. 39 minutes before Judge Callahan would return from her hearing. Rosalind carried the 3 courtesy copies to the judge's chambers herself. When Judge Callahan returned to her bench and reviewed the documents, she accepted the filing without comment. The show cause order was never signed. No sanctions were issued. The motion proceeded through the normal briefing schedule, and 3 weeks later, the court granted summary judgment in favor of our client. $14.7 million in claimed damages, dismissed. The Delacroix family received justice. The case was over. When I returned to the office that afternoon, the atmosphere had changed completely. It was as though someone had lowered the barometric pressure in the building. Blake Whitfield was in Marcus Henderson's office with the door closed. I could hear voices through the wall, not shouting, but the clipped, deliberate, forceful tone of a conversation that occurs when senior partners realize that someone they hired on the strength of a glossy RA sum A nearly destroyed the firm's biggest client relationship and their own professional reputations. Robert Calloway was in his own office, and when I walked past his open door, he rose from his chair, came to the doorway, and said 2 words. "Thank you, D." I nodded. I walked to my desk. I sat down, I turned on my monitor, and I went back to work, because that is what I have always done. The internal review that followed took approximately 2 weeks. Marcus Henderson, suddenly and urgently interested in the operational details he had been too busy to examine, ordered a comprehensive audit of every single filing that had been processed under Blake's new system. They found 7 non-compliance issues across 4 separate cases. 2 had generated telephone calls from court clerks expressing judicial displeasure. 1 had triggered a written inquiry from opposing counsel asking whether our firm was experiencing internal difficulties. The only reason none of these incidents had escalated into formal sanctions, malpractice exposure, or case-ending disasters was that I, along with 2 other senior legal secretaries, had been quietly identifying and correcting the errors on our own time, without recognition, without compensation, and without a single word of acknowledgement from the man whose systems had caused them. Blake Whitfield III was stripped of his authority over administrative operations. Before the end of November, he was reassigned to a non-supervisory role in the contract review department, which in a litigation firm is roughly the professional equivalent of being asked to sit quietly in a corner and not touch anything important. He lasted 4 more months in that role before he resigned, citing in his firm-wide departure email a desire to pursue, and I quote, "opportunities more closely aligned with my strategic vision," unquote. Not a single person in the building replied to that email. Not one. Marcus Henderson called me into his office on a Friday afternoon in December. He asked me to sit down, which he had never done before in 28 years. He walked to the credenza behind his desk and poured me a cup of coffee from his personal French press, the good coffee, the kind the senior partners kept for themselves. He told me that the firm was creating a new position, Senior Litigation Coordinator, reporting directly to the partner group on all filing procedures, court logistics, and compliance with judicial standing orders. The position came with a raise, a private office with a window, and formal authority that no junior partner or outside consultant could override without partner approval. He asked me if I would accept. I said yes. I did not gloat. I did not deliver a speech. I did not remind him that I had warned him and he had chosen not to listen. I simply said, "Yes, thank you, Marcus," and I drank my coffee. People sometimes ask me what lesson I took from the Blake Whitfield experience. I tell them I did not learn a single thing, because I already knew it. I have known it for 28 years. And I suspect I knew it even before that. The lesson is simple. And it is the same lesson that every serious profession teaches. If you stay in it long enough to listen, there is no substitute for knowing the work, not software, not credentials, not confidence, not a degree from an institution whose name makes people nod approvingly at cocktail parties. Knowing the work means understanding that the difference between a filing that a judge accepts and a filing that a judge strikes can come down to a font choice, a margin width, or whether you used a staple. When the standing orders called for a metal clasp, it means understanding that the person who has been doing the job quietly and competently for decades may carry knowledge in her head that your most sophisticated platform cannot capture, categorize, or replicate. I am still at Henderson, Callaway and Marsh. My new office has a window that overlooks Maple Street and the 2-hour parking zone where I have parked my car 1,000 times on the way to the courthouse. My desk still smells faintly of toner. The coffee in the break room is still terrible. But the filings go out correctly, and they go out on time, and they have never, not once in 28 years, been rejected or stricken. And when the new people arrive, as they always do, full of energy and ideas about efficiency and modernization and scalable systems and data-driven optimization, I smile. I pour them a cup of that terrible breakroom coffee. And I say the same thing I have always said. Let me show you how things actually work around here. Because some systems cannot be optimized, some knowledge cannot be automated, and some people, the quiet ones, the invisible ones, the ones whose names will never appear on the letterhead, are the only reason the whole operation does not come apart at the seams. I am one of those people, and I am not going anywhere.